Can men and women just be friends? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Let's talk about the question, can men and women just be friends? I've been seeing this a lot coming up on social media, this topic coming up a lot, and I actually just did a film breakdown of When Harry Met Sally, which is kind of the iconic film that really started this question way back in the 80s, and we're still talking about it today. So before we get into this, I want to kind of state, just for the sake of simplicity for this particular video, I'm going to focus on men who are sexually attracted to women and women who are sexually attracted to men. There's so many different dynamics that we could dive into when it comes to different orientations and different circumstances and things like that. I'm simply going to talk about men and women from that perspective. I've had a lot of men friends who were not sexually attracted to women at all, and that's a totally different thing. That's not really what we're talking about in this particular video. So that said, when I first started hearing a lot of people talking recently about men and women just can't be friends, the first thing that popped up for me was, I was like, well, that's not true, because I have a ton of men friends. I used to work with mostly men. I did stand-up comedy. Most of the guys that I spent most of my time with were men. Most of the people I know on my social media and things like that, like people I know in real life, are mostly men. And I was like, well, I have a ton of guy friends. Like, that works out fine. It's not a problem. However, usually when the conversation then gets a little bit deeper into the actual dynamics of these friendship relationships, I realized something. I'm guilty of this, and I think a lot of people out in the world are guilty of this today, just because of the way we use language. I was using the term friend and acquaintance as the same word. And I still do that. I find myself doing that a lot. And I realized that I have a ton of male acquaintances. They're people who I know I've worked with. They're people who, if something good happened to them on social media, I'd be like, congratulations. They're people who, you know, we would reach out to each other if we had some kind of like a business question or a work question or something, or like a lot of times guys that I've known have like reached out to me to ask like for social media advice, since I'm so active on social media, things like that. Like, it's a very platonic situation, but it's really an acquaintance. Like, these are not guys who I'm like calling up at night, like talking about my relationships, or like going out with on these like platonic dates and just like complaining about my boyfriend. That's not what's going on in my situation. And one of the things that comes up is I see this with a lot of these alpha male accounts that are like, well, if you called up like your best guy friend or texted him and said that you wanted to hook up, like, would he be okay with it? And when they have girls actually try this out, the guys are totally okay with it. And they use the example that, okay, well, this guy is just sitting around waiting for you to want to have sex with him, so obviously you were never really just friends. I don't necessarily think that that line of thinking is necessarily true. And because we also have to acknowledge, and most of the accounts that say these kind of things also acknowledge this as well, that men and women just simply have a different biological response when it comes to sex. So when you have whether it be a friendship, an acquaintance, or you have any kind of interaction between men and women, and you have a woman who then says, okay, well, I'm going to give you the opening to sex. Most men, hopefully ones that are not in another relationship with somebody else, but most men are probably going to take them up on that offer, because for them, it's not going to change their feelings or emotions about the relationship in general, particularly if they are just friends. He may still have a sexual attraction to her, and he may go along with it because it's not going to change his feelings or emotions or his status about the relationship. Whereas with a woman, it's going to change their dynamic. It's going to change things emotionally. She's not going to view him the same way. Not necessarily that she's automatically going to want a relationship with him, but things are going to change. Like, sex does change things, and women are going to be much more sensitive to that change. So just because a man is willing to have sex with a woman that he is just friends with doesn't necessarily mean that he has just been sitting there waiting for that moment where she says, I'm going to have sex with him. Maybe he is, though. I mean, I think those kind of details vary. However, I understand the concept that if you now are in a relationship and you have two people who are in committed relationships, and now they have friends of the opposite sex, and I can see where those situations would get cloudy. So I'm not dismissing that aspect of things. In general, I would say, and there probably are exceptions to this rule, because again, I wouldn't want to get into a relationship with a man and have him be like, okay, well, you can never have anything to do with any male acquaintance that you've ever had in your life, because I'm afraid that you're going to sleep with them. Like, I would hope that he would trust me enough to know that I have set boundaries with people. I'm very good at setting boundaries with the men that I've had interactions with. If as a woman, you're not good at setting boundaries with the men in your life or the men that you are acquaintances with, you need to work on that. regardless of whether you're going to have man friends or not, you need to work on boundaries. Boundaries are incredibly important for you to have any kind of relationship with anyone. I would also hope, if I was in a relationship with a man, that he would, if he did have female acquaintances in his life, that he would be able to set boundaries with them, that he would not just jump at any opportunity to sleep with them if they gave him the opportunity, because he would be committed to me. And if he's not committed to me in that way, then we're not in the right relationship. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't as people live in a bubble. You know what I mean? Like, it would be great if you could be in a relationship with someone and they would never have any kind of interaction with anybody of the opposite gender ever again, and you wouldn't have to worry about them cheating. However, that's not the world we live in. That said, I do understand when people say they don't want their partner to have friends of the opposite sex in their life and like hanging out with or going out with or doing things with. Like that I can understand, because there probably will be some sexual tension going on, and you don't necessarily want your partner to be putting themselves into a situation unnecessarily where there are temptations or there may be lines that get crossed or things like that. Like, I respect that, I honor that. And I do think that those are two separate things. So, you know, we can't block each other off from ever having anything to do with people of the opposite gender ever again. However, but there is also something to be said for being in a committed relationship with someone and having that person not put themselves actively in a situation where those lines could possibly be blurred or crossed. So if you are in a committed relationship, there really do need to be strict boundaries around those kind of interactions. Another thing too that I think is interesting, because most of the time I hear these discussions come up with men saying that men and women can't be friends and trying to tell women that they can't be friends because the man is always basically sitting there secretly waiting for her to decide that she wants to sleep with him. And oftentimes they'll also say, like, waiting for them to be available or waiting for them to be out of a relationship so that they can take that opportunity. There is another perspective though that I don't think gets pointed out as much, because a lot of these topics tend to come up from men and men telling women about these things. But there's one aspect that I understand that I'll use an example from my own life. So I have a male acquaintance known for a while. We're acquaintances because we've established that we're not looking for the same things in a relationship. But we do have similar interests, and we do have a lot of similar perspectives, and we do have a great respect for each other. That said, I know if I were to message him right now and ask him to take things sexually or decided that I wanted things to be sexual, I know he'd jump at the chance. I know that. But I would never do that. And I also know on the flip side that if he were to message me right now and say, hey, I would like to take you on a date and see about taking our relationship in a more romantic level, I would be open to that. But I also know he's never going to do that. He is open to a sexual relationship. I'm not open to a sexual relationship if it's not going to also be a romantic relationship. Whereas he's not open for a romantic relationship, at least not with me. I'm not willing to have just the sexual relationship. So we're acquaintances. No partner that I'm with or no partner that he's with has to worry about that, because neither one of us is ever going to give the other one what they want because we're not aligned. I think the example that people use a lot, that a man is just sitting around like waiting for this female friend of his to not be in a relationship or be available, as if he's this like long-suffering friends with benefits guy, which he very well could be. I'm not saying that that's not an issue. However, he may just be a guy who just doesn't want a relationship with her and would have sex with her if she wanted, but if she doesn't want to, he won't, and they're just not going to come together that way. Like, it could be two people who have just established that they're just not compatible romantically. And again, if it's crossing a line for you, if you're in a relationship and you don't want your person to be in a relationship with someone of the opposite gender, I honor that. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just bringing up these topics just as things for people to think about. I also do know over the years of having worked with a lot of men and being around a lot of men that I do think a lot of men fear the friend zone. Like, they're terrified of the friend zone. And I want guys to know that the friend zone is not the worst place to be in, especially if you're a man. Now, as a woman, if you're friend zoned, it's done. And women do get friend zoned too. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But if you're in the friend zone, you're done. If as a man, you're in the friend zone, it's not hopeless, because very often women will put men in a friend zone that they want to get to know better. And I feel like oftentimes, and I've seen men do this, where they rush or force a physical relationship too quickly and pressure a woman too quickly because they have this fear that if she doesn't see him as a sexual being immediately, that she won't be interested in him sexually at all. That's not how women operate. That's how men operate. Men are either sexually attracted to a woman or they're not, and that's that. But women can grow that sexual attraction as they get to know someone and they feel safe. I am not at all saying that men should just be sitting around waiting for a woman to decide that she's woken up and wants to have an intimate relationship with a man. That's not what I'm saying. However, that attraction for women can grow. So as a man, I don't want to see men make really dumb decisions when it comes to relationships, because I've seen this happen before, out of this fear of the friend zone. You're always in control of the friend zone, and that goes for men and women. And I'm going to talk about the friend zone with men. Typically is the guy who is pining for the woman, like is in love with this woman, but she's not interested in him. She's stringing him along. She's probably getting everything she can out of him, but he's not getting any kind of a sexual relationship that he longs for because he actually wants to be in a relationship with her. I'm speaking of this from a non-manipulative way. Like if a guy is literally just like in this and faking a friendship just to get whatever he can from her, that's a separate situation. I'm talking about the guy who actually has fallen for this woman and longs for things to be an actual relationship, but she's really just taking from him what she can get from him, like emotional connection, someone to talk to, someone who will take her out on dates, but she's not actually making the commitment and having an actual intimate relationship, or not actually committing to a relationship with him at all. Like you could have a non-sexual relationship where people are waiting until marriage or something like that, but I'm talking about like she's withholding the actual relationship part, but she's taking from him everything that benefits her. As opposed to, on the flip side, when women get friend zoned, they get put in the I'm not ready for a relationship thing, but like we can be friends and hook up kind of thing. So very often what will happen in that situation is the guy will take from the woman the sexual part, but never give her the relationship part that she actually desires. So that's where you get the flip side. In both situations, you are always in full control. You are always in full control of that situation because you always have the option of telling the person, hey, if you're a man and you're like, hey, I don't want to just be friends with you. I want a relationship. I want us to see where things go. I really care about you and I want to see where a relationship, an actual romantic relationship can go with us. If you're not on board with that, then that's okay, but I'm just gonna have to walk away. That's the masculine way to handle things. When you're in your wounded feminine, that's when you start following her around like a little lap dog and let her call the shots. When you're in your masculine as a man, you say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. If you're not on board, then that's okay. I'm gonna move on. If you are on board, this is where I'd like things to go. As a woman, if you find yourself in the friend zone and you end up in this sense of the guy's like, well, I mean, we can hook up, but like I don't really want a relationship, and you're in that situation where you're continuing to give him the sex in hopes that he'll want a relationship, you have the power to say, you know what? I don't want this to be just about sex. I do want something more. I'm looking for a partner that will do X, Y, and Z. Do you want this? If not, I'm gonna move on. You are always in control. Now, you cannot control the other person, but you always have the control to decide how you handle the situation. You always have the option of saying, this situationship, this friendship, this friends with benefits, whatever the situation is, you always have the option of saying, this doesn't serve me. If this is all that's going to be served in this situation, I'm gonna walk away. Always have that option. I'm saying this very matter-of-factly. I'm not saying that this isn't going to come with heartbreak. This isn't going to come with emotions. This isn't going to come with pain. Especially, you may very well be doing this because you're in some kind of a trauma bond with somebody. Those things are all valid. Feel what you're feeling, but you always have the power to set a boundary, set a standard, walk away. And I want people to feel empowered by that. I don't want to see men, especially, because I do think a lot of men fear the friend zone, and I don't want you to fear it. If you actually do take the time to get to know each other in a relationship, you're gonna have a much more solid relationship in the long run. Now, if you as a man are only looking to hook up, I can't really help you. That's not what my channel's about. If you do want a relationship, I don't want to see men start pushing things too quickly because they fear the friend zone. The friend zone is not something to fear. I want you to know you always have control over the situation. It's not something that some woman can just put you in and you are at the mercy of that. You always have the option of saying, this isn't what I want, this isn't what serves me. If you're not aligned with what I want, I can walk away. If you're having trouble doing that, I would encourage you to do the healing work to work on why it is that you were attaching to somebody who doesn't actually want the same things that you want. And that goes for women as well. If you're attaching to a man who doesn't want the same things that you want, asking yourself why and healing that part of yourself is super important. So what do you do if you have a friendship with somebody of the opposite gender as you? Well, I would invite you to really ask yourself what it is that you want from the friendship. To really ask yourself, is this a friendship that is serving me? Ask yourself these questions, be very honest with yourself. I also think it's valid to bring these things up with them, especially if you're feeling like maybe they're looking for more, or you're thinking that maybe there aren't set boundaries in the relationship. And this goes for if you're in a committed relationship, or if you're not, or if one of you is and one of you isn't. Those kind of things are all valid. And I think if you do have a friendship with somebody, then having some of these conversations might be important. Even if you're not in a relationship with somebody, you obviously want to be putting yourself in a situation, if you are looking for a relationship, you want to be creating a life that will best serve calling in the right partner. So if you, for example, as a woman are spending all of your time with a close male friend who you know that you don't want a romantic relationship with, but you do want to call in a romantic relationship, but you are always spending your time with this man who is giving you all the masculine energy that you want, and you're kind of not calling in the man that you really do want, you might want to ask yourself, is this friendship serving me or is it not? And I think in the same way, you know, if a man is in that situation, I'm not saying you have to cut off all of your friendships or anything like that. I'm just saying that asking yourself these questions is really important. If you do get into a relationship with somebody, they're going to have their own comfort level and they're going to have their own boundaries around those kind of friendships, and you have to kind of ask yourself what it is that you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. So at the end of the day, can men and women just be friends? I don't want to say it's not possible. I would probably say it's not very likely though. If this is triggering you, which I know this conversation triggers a lot of people, ask yourself why. I always, when you get triggered by something, or you get, you know, concerned about something, or something comes up for you, I always invite you to sit with it, maybe journal with it, just kind of see what comes up and ask yourself why this is. Regardless of what it is that you decide to do for your relationship, for your friendships, for anything, boundaries are super important. If you have fuzzy lines with boundaries in any situation, with any kind of friendships or any kind of relationships where you're not really solid in your boundaries, you're asking for disaster. So I think that boundaries and standards in these situations are incredibly important when you're dealing with any kind of situation like this. And I also would encourage you to realize that in our society, we can't cut off everybody from having interactions with people of the opposite gender. It's just not the way the world works. However, you know, there is a difference between an acquaintance and a friendship, and that's something that I know I'm very big on messing up those terminologies. So it doesn't mean that you can't have anything to do with, you know, that women can't have anything to do with any men, or can't have male mentors, or can't have, you know, men helping them out. I will say over the years, it's definitely come to my attention, having worked with a lot of men before, a lot of men who sometimes I thought were like really good family men, you know, that I felt safe around because I was like, okay, they're in a committed relationship, so I don't have to worry about them. Or situations where I thought that somebody was just a friend or just helping me out. I have ended up finding out that their intentions were not as noble, and I'm not putting that on all men at all. However, it's something I've learned over the years that I have no control over that. And that doesn't mean that I have to block myself off from every man in the world. However, I do need to be very grounded in my boundaries around what my interactions with certain men are going to be. I would also note though that over the years, because I did work with mostly men, there were definitely times when I would have a guy I was working with who I kind of knew, who was an acquaintance, who would be going through a tough time, and he would really want to talk to me about it, because I do think, unfortunately, in our world today, we don't have a lot of interactions with people. We're very isolated. Particularly men become very isolated. And sometimes some of these guys would be going through things that they just didn't feel like they were comfortable talking to their male friends about, because again, I worked in stand-up comedy, so some of them were like, oh, he's just gonna bust my balls or whatever. Whereas if they came to me, where I had established myself, I tried to, at least in my workspace, as being kind of like a sister, like everybody's sister kind of thing. But sometimes I would realize, like, they'd be like, hey, let me buy you a drink, let me buy you a drink, and be like, no, 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 because I really wouldn't want to open up that door. But then I would realize that they just want someone to talk to. And I wouldn't get drunk. Like, I wouldn't even really drink. I don't really drink much, but I would sit and listen, because I could tell they just needed an ear to listen. And there are some situations where I think there are men out there who just feel a little bit more comfortable opening up to a female, because I think sometimes, you know, we don't have great masculine leadership in our society, so sometimes men just feel a little bit more comfortable opening up to a woman because they haven't necessarily felt safe opening up to men. I would like to see a shift with that, and I do think more and more, and I'm seeing it more and more, that there are men who are creating men's groups and male spaces where men can get together and they can actually talk to each other in safe spaces, and I think that that's beautiful. I would also note that there are some men who are at this moment only going to feel safe discussing some of their feelings and emotions with a woman because they feel like it's a little bit safer. Some men won't feel that way. Some men will feel safer to talk to a man about it. I think this line of thinking as far as the friendship thing, it's important. Boundaries are important. I also don't want to see people use this idea of men and women not being able to be just friends as a way of people isolating themselves more and not actually going out and seeking the help or seeking support that they actually need. So, can men and women just be friends? The sexual stuff, the sexual tension very often is going to cloud that, and it probably will mess up your relationships. That said, I think if you're dealing with people who are mature adults who have set boundaries, then acquaintances, friendships, things like that, like, are possible. And I don't want to see people have a bigger divide as far as men and women and seeing each other as the enemy or unsafe or things like that. I think it's better if we learn to come together. That said, boundaries are always important. So I think if you're going into a male-female friendship like blindly or from an immature place or like from an unconscious place, it can get really dangerous. If you're going into it from a conscious place, you have your set boundaries, and you actually you both really understand like why you're in this friendship, whether it be communication or whether it be like a mentorship or something like that. I think that's important. I think those things can be beautiful and those things can be important, especially if you have people who haven't grown up around, say, positive masculine energy or positive feminine energy. Having somebody in their life that is a great representation of the masculine or the feminine, that shows them a healthy example of that, that can be really beautiful too. So as much as I do think that it can get messy, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that those things can get messy, I don't necessarily think that we need to cut ourselves off from the idea completely. I just think it's really important. Again, I keep saying this, but boundaries are so important in this. So none of this was really a definitive, can men and women just be friends? If you don't feel comfortable having, you're a man, you don't feel comfortable having women friends, or as a woman, you don't feel comfortable having man friends, honor that. I'm not here to judge. If you do feel like you can have friends, if as a man you feel like you can have women friends, if as a woman you feel like you can have man friends, I'm just opening up the discussion. I'm just saying I think that these are things that are all valid to think about. And I realize I do get some criticism sometimes when I make these videos that I'm just giving the female perspective. Of course I'm giving the female perspective. I try to give a balanced perspective, but I'm a woman. I'm giving my perspective on things. I do feel like there's a lot of men giving their opinions about this. I just wanted to share as a woman what some of my thoughts on this topic are. So I'm open to your discussions as long as they're polite and respectful. So if you have any thoughts on this topic or any other topic requests, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you and I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you're a woman and would like to connect to your feminine energy, I have online courses you can check out. They're in the details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.